Welcome to this midweek message. I'm Drew Goins. Today with me, Nick Poole. We are continuing our Bible People A to Z. We are on L. That brings us to Lydia. Do you have any, I just told you who it was, any honorable mentions that it could have been?
Not many that come to head or to light.
There's not a ton of L. Lioness, Lion, and Daniel in the Lion's Den. We were gonna
Lion.
That was going to be one of our main ones. I'm trying to think. Now that we say that, I don't know. I can't think of any other honorable mentions. Lamb, Laban.
There are definitely some locations with
L's,
in
yeah.
Scripture, but not many L people.
That's okay. I like who we've got today. So, do you know what the name Lydia means?
It's kind of interesting. So in the Bible, Lydia is a Greek name, which is kind of telling in of itself, kind of the background of Lydia herself. Her name means travail, means to travail. And the only times that you ever see her mentioned in Scripture are Acts 16:14 and Acts 16:40. So she's only mentioned in this one chapter, and that's it. There's nothing else about her in Scripture. But it's interesting, even though she's only mentioned the one time, there's a lot that we can pull from the text regarding Lydia. I mean, even her name, like I said, being Greek. And we'll kind of jump into the timeline a little bit of this. Are you familiar with where? I mean, just out of reading this, are you familiar with like where Lydia was whenever all of this transpired?
Philippi.
Yeah, she was in Philippi, which is a district out of Macedonia, which is
Roman occupation.
Yeah. Okay. And what's really neat about this is that Lydia was actually the first European convert for Paul.
Yep, that's my notes too. That's pretty cool. She's the first. In Philippi.
Yeah, in Philippi.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting is that, you read through this story in Acts 16:11 through 15, and you find Paul and his team traveling, and they come to Philippi, and it's the Sabbath, and they stayed there for a few days, so it comes to be the Sabbath, and they start looking for a place to worship. Now, one of the big things here that we have to understand in terms of this backdrop is Paul is while very much a Roman citizen, culturally, he's an outcast. Like, he is not one of them. And this is not a Jewish colony. This is very much Gentile territory, and the Jews are the minority
in that.
Yeah. And so one of the first things it says on the Sabbath, they start looking for a place to pray outside the city gate.
Outcast, but gates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting that the more that I've read about it, I get so intrigued by this, that there wasn't a formal place for them inside the city to worship. So they decided to go outside the city by the river, which is kind of a really neat setup to this story.
A little backdrop. Yeah, I like that too. This honestly is a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, we talked about divine appointments, and you haven't listened to that one because we just shot it today, but it's coming out. It's a mess. But anyways, Jesus is going somewhere and gets interrupted. And it's like, man, how often do we like mess up those divine appointments? Honestly, them being forced out to pray by the gate in itself is a divine appointment for Lydia and what becomes of them. So sorry, keep going.
No, you're fine. One thing I love about Scripture and how it was written, and then how they kind of canonized it, is how they portray the people and the descriptions that they used when they were writing this. So Lydia, it has several descriptions that we can see. So I'll kind of run down the profile of her. So she is a worshiper of God.
Can I do? Oh, you go ahead. Go ahead. Do yours.
No. She's a
this.
worshiper of God.
Mm-hmm.
She sells purple cloth. She has her own house, not her husband.
Well, it says
house.
Her household.
Her household.
So I don't know if that's reference to slaves, if that's reference to children. There's not a whole lot that's her household. Again, in that time, you wouldn't refer to a female's household. It would be the male's household. So you're right in that. It's just there are others in there that we know about.
Oh, absolutely. And this kind of lends to the fact that she is probably very wealthy because of what she's trading in, which was purple cloth, which was primarily designated for royalty and also Roman citizens. So she probably was well off, very well
I
off.
think that's a fair assessment for sure.
And not only that, she was someone that would travel. So like she also has this. So she's in Philippi, but the Bible clearly says that she's from a place, the city of Thyatira. So she's very I mean, she's rich. She's a worshiper of God. She's a Gentile, and yet she is outside the city gate, having this very impressive profile. I'd almost call it a resume.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were going city to city trying to sell something, it's impressive. It's an impressive business profile. And then it goes worshiper of God, and she's out there with Paul. And what's really neat is we get into this is that when you start looking at it, Paul sits down with these women who are at the river praying, and he starts talking to them. One of the commentaries I looked at described it as Paul actually being a guest speaker at their impromptu synagogue.
Their tea club. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's funny.
And that he was kind of the guest rabbi. And what's really, really interesting here is the worshiper of God. And I kind of did a little bit of a word study on this one too. So worshiper is its own separate word, and then of God is its separate word. So it's actually two separate words or phrases. Worshiper is kind of it's kind of a does statement. It's to revere or to honor or to worship. I mean, it says what it is.
Okay.
But what's really interesting there is it's a religious or devout individual that does those things, which I find interesting.
Yeah. Again, goes to her description a little bit.
Yeah. So she had, and the way that I would look into this and read it, and again, this is me. This is me reading the text for what it is. I see it as someone who is very comfortable with Scripture and comfortable with who God is, someone who has an understanding in its entirety of Yahweh. Because the other side of it, of God, is, well, God. They're religious and devout to God. And what is really cool here is once you get past that, you see this kind of 1, 2, 3 step process. It goes worshiper of God, and then God opened her heart to respond to Paul's message.
Yeah.
And then there's the really neat bit where she goes from hearing Paul's message and being a worshiper of God, she is converted and then baptized at the river where they're praying.
Yeah. That's kind of I'm going to jump to my application piece a little bit too in that. So I've got it like 6 or 7 steps that you said in 3. Because again, I think it's pretty cool. Again, we are in Acts 16 if you want to read that. But she listens. I'm going to say she listens and speaks with Paul. Mm-hmm. And then she worshiped. She's a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart. She was baptized. Look, this progression is super cool to me. Then she bears fruit. She invites them. She shares her resources and bears fruit and lets Paul in. Then she persuades them. She persuades Paul and says, hey, I've got this resource I want to share with you. And then later we jump over to 40. She encourages. And I'm thinking, man, that's the life application piece is that this process of believer to worship, baptism, fruit, encouragement. I mean, it's an awesome picture of that Christian walk and that process of her. We get to see it in 4-6 verses of that. I don't know. I think that's pretty cool.
I think so too. And the thing that I would take from that as well is also this idea that worshiping God is not the same as following God. That there's 2 very different components there. You can worship God and not follow God, but you can't follow God and not worship Him. And the reason I say that is you can worship God and you can know all the steps A through Z of what you need to do to go to church, to pray, to go to Bible study, Sunday school, small group, work at a soup kitchen. I mean, you can do all of those things and know all of those things are good.
And we hope you do.
And we hope you do those things. There's nothing wrong with that. The important thing is that you go to that other side of it and you go a step further where you're following Christ and you're living into those things. That it isn't necessarily the devoutness of it. It is a real life moving towards a deeper relationship
Sure.
with God. And then, more importantly, as we see at verse 16 or verse 15, you see her persuading Paul that she is indeed a follower of Christ.
Can I read? Can I read?
Yeah,
15?
go ahead.
When she stood the members of I'm sorry. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer, this is her, in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us.
So even then, you go into say, adding to her profile, she's intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a clear understanding she knows who God is in Scripture to some degree, and then she has the ability to persuade someone like Paul that we know from other passages in his background and his resume that he is a very intelligent person. So her being able to persuade him and bear that fruit, as you say, is so important to our walk with Christ.
I think I read it as she's confident, and like you said, in who she is in her walk, is that her confidence allows her to do those things.
I love it. It was really neat kind of looking at her because you get to look at that progression in a very different way than I think sometimes it's persuaded or that you describe it. Sometimes it's you got to do this and you got to do that, but this one's like nope, I'm a worshiper, I know what's going on, and then you see the process come to full fruition almost immediately.
Yeah, it's like great persuaders don't have to use like a ton of words. It's like she doesn't have to do that. It's just here it is. Like it was just kind of cool too. I think there some early church tradition has that her house would become the Philippi church early on, which is cool. If we turn the page a couple times, and there's an entire book written to that church that very well could have started in her house, which is again just goes to I know who I am, and I'm going to walk in the middle of God's will, which is super cool. So.
Yeah, and again, this is another testament too. Even though this person's only mentioned literally 2 times in Scripture, they can have a profound impact.
Yep.
And I think another piece that I would add in here to Lydia's profile is due to the fact that they even mention her name, it shows that she had some level of economic and social influence that goes beyond just, well, she was a person. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't even go so far as it's just a person. No, she was someone very important, and I think she proves that in this passage, and I think she proves it again after Paul and Silas go through prison, that they go back to
her house, yeah.
and then they encourage her and bless her for it. So.
And I think she encourages them as I read that too.
Oh, that's how you read it?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's with the brothers and encourage them, and then so I think it's a. Again, I'm going to quote Paul's words here.
No, you go for it.
I look forward to our mutual faith, so that we may both be encouraged in that. I wish I knew where that was, but I would put it on the screen for you guys. But it's a mutual encouragement is what I read it as. Whether that's right or not, I don't know.
I can see that. I can actually very much see that.
Which is how our brothers and sisters in Christ should be a mutual encouragement. So. Well, I hope you all enjoyed it as you listen and watch out there. Stay connected, stay encouraged.